Your grandmom never owned a cookbook or even attended a single cooking class. Yet everything that came out of her kitchen tasted as if it belonged in a five-star restaurant. Yet the food industry ended up banning them and hoped you would forget. Today, we are bringing 10 of these tricks back. Homemade raw egg mayonnaise. Grandma just needs eggs, a drizzle of oil, a squeeze of lemon, and everything else was just pure talent and skill passed down through generations. Then, just when this mayonnaise had become a household name, salmonella concerns hit and raw eggs got flagged. But there is a part to this story that always gets buried. The eggs used came straight from a neighbor's backyard flock and not from a processing plant running at industrial scale. Thus, the risk the warnings described was not living in her kitchen. Regardless, what she made was a condiment with actual personality, and every store-bought jar since is deemed to be just a very polished imitation. Next, tenderizing meat was a whole different battle, and Grandmom had an overnight weapon poised to blow your mind. Buttermilk as a meat tenderizer. If there was a tough meat and the wallet was empty, Grandmom had a solution at hand, and that came in the form of a bowl of buttermilk and a good night's sleep. To be honest, nobody in the 50s was splurging on premium cuts. Whatever the budget allowed came home, and she unleashed her magic and made it work. She would immerse drumsticks, pork chops, or even liver into that cold white bath before bedtime, and by morning, the lactic acid in buttermilk had dismantled muscle fiber from the inside. Health guidelines eventually discouraged commercial kitchens from the practice, and it gradually became a forgotten practice. And while buttermilk was quietly working overnight, another kitchen secret was slowly melting in a cast iron pan only to suffer the same fate. Rendering and cooking with chicken schmaltz. For Grandmom, a jar of pale yellow fat in the icebox was worth more than anything else on that shelf. In immigrant kitchens from Brooklyn to Chicago, chicken fat was put into a cast iron pan with sliced onions and left to cook on low heat until everything turned golden. That right there was schmaltz. Not to forget the crackling skin left behind in the pan. This was eaten warm and salted straight off the skillet. It was arguably the finest thing ever produced in the home kitchen. No debate entertained. But with time, the saturated fat wars began and margarine won. In the end, the jar vanished and nobody seemed to notice until it was long gone. Speaking of stretching ingredients beyond their limits, you need to hear what she did with just 2 eggs. Adding baking powder to omelet batter. When the egg count was dangerously low and people still had to have their breakfast, Grandmom had yet another trick up her sleeve. Baking powder. She would whisk just a small pinch straight into the eggs before the pan. What came out was an omelet so fluffy that just one was enough to keep you going for the entire day. So what was the science behind this move? Baking powder reacted with the moisture in the eggs and the heat of the skillet, releasing carbon dioxide bubbles that pushed the batter upward. More volume meant more body. However, the technique eventually got buried under the rise of culinary minimalism. Things like thin French omelets, barely set scrambles, and the runny yolk came in. But Grandmom chose to remain authentic and not chase sophistication. What Grandmom did next will undoubtedly make this trick feel so amateur. Homemade brine. Pickling without a canner. Every August, the garden had completely lost the plot. Cucumbers were taking over the sink, zucchini appearing from nowhere, and green beans staging a quiet rebellion in paper bags by the door. Something had to be done, so the pickling began. Boiling vinegar brine over raw vegetables, lids on tight, and good to go. By September, those shelves held summer in a jar. It was bright, crunchy, and well preserved. It could carry the family from August straight through February without strain. Then came the FDA, which flagged improper home pickling as a genuine safety risk, killing the process almost instantly. But one thing remained clear. Grandma's ratios were inherited precision tested by generations who couldn't afford to get it wrong. But while she was preserving summer in jars, something else entirely was sitting on her stovetop waiting to be rediscovered. Saving bacon grease in a tin can. In almost every Grandmom's kitchen, there was a dented tin can. Every Sunday, she would strain the leftover bacon fat straight into it, with the wire mesh catching the burnt bits and the golden grease pooling below. She then placed it beside the burner, ready to unleash it on Monday's eggs, Tuesday's cornbread, and Wednesday's greens. Then, the 1970s arrived, and along came an opinion about saturated fat and poorer heart health. The American Heart Association declared war and the tin cans started disappearing as everyone switched to hydrogenated vegetable oils. But there is a plot twist. Those oils turned out to be considerably worse. Safe to say that Grandma's can was right all along. Saving fat sounded resourceful, but wait until you hear what she did with the leftover bones. All day bone and broth on the stovetop. When Sunday's dinner ended, Grandma would collect all the bones and put them straight into the pot. Next, she added onion skins, celery tops, a bay leaf, and cold water. She would then set the burner on low and leave it for 10, sometimes 12 hours. What eventually came out was dense, amber, and almost gelatinous. Then came modernity, and health experts started discouraging unattended stovetop cooking for that long. Everything sold since has just been a well-packaged imitation that gets nowhere near that broth. But Grandma's resourcefulness never stopped at the pot. Even the vegetables that had given up got a second chance. Reviving wilted vegetables in cold salted water. Limp lettuce in Grandma's kitchen was never a problem. Grandma would put it into a bowl of ice-cold salted water along with whatever sad, deflated produce had given up on itself that week. And 1 hour is all it needed for it to come out crisp, firm, and entirely back in business. Sadly, science eventually caught up as experts argued that cold salted water created osmotic pressure that would pull moisture back into the depleted plant cells, while the chill reinforced the pectin structure that gave vegetables their snap. But Grandma did not know any of that terminology, obviously. She just knew that throwing away food that could be saved was simply out of the question. Up next, did you know that Grandma had also found a way to freeze an entire season? Freezing fresh herbs in fat cubes. When the garden was fading fast in late September, Grandma was already 3 steps ahead. Before the first frost could claim anything, herbs such as basil, rosemary, parsley, and thyme got stripped and packed into ice cube trays. She then covered them in warm chicken fat or olive oil and froze them. By November, when fresh herbs at the market cost an arm and a leg, her freezer held rows of green fleck cubes just waiting to be dropped into a hot pan. 1 cube was enough to produce instant fragrance, and science backs it completely. Oil shields herbs from oxidation and ice crystal damage far better than drying ever managed. Authorities do caution against herb and oil storage at room temperature, yet when frozen, it's perfectly safe. Grandma never took that particular shortcut anyway. Now, if freezing herbs and fat surprised you, nothing quite prepares you for what she has hiding in her cake. Mayonnaise cake. Nobody knew what made this cake so good. The recipe showed up in church cookbooks simply as chocolate cake. It was just an impossibly moist crumb that stayed tender for days and somehow got better overnight. In all these, the secret was a jar of mayonnaise sitting right there in Grandma's kitchen. Mayo is already emulsified eggs and oil, the 2 ingredients every cake recipe demands anyway. Combined, they coated flour proteins more thoroughly than either did separately, locking moisture in from the first bite to the last. And the interesting thing is that commercial bakeries were quietly running this same trick for decades to extend shelf life. They knew exactly what Grandma knew, but just never put it on the label. Subscribe to the channel for more videos like this one.